Hello everyone, my name is Camryn Counsil. I am a research fellow through the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College, and today I'm here to talk about the Jacob Stock House as well as the larger themes about the limits of destruction throughout the course of the American Civil War. So here we are on South Washington Street in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and on this street it might just look like normal houses. However, upon closer inspection, one can see pockmarks all over the south side of this wall, as well as a section of the wall that has been repaired. During the Battle of Gettysburg, this building, which served as a tavern called the Swan Inn, sustained heavy artillery damage. Now, this is an overlay photo that shows what the 1863 damage would look like on today's modern building. The cause of this damage likely comes from Union Adolph von Steinwehr's division and Confederate William Dorsey Pender's division, as this area was occupied by their skirmishes. Now, there aren't first-hand accounts of what occurred here, so we can't be sure of the specifics, but it is assumed that there was a Confederate sharpshooter up in the attic. Over the course of the Battle of Gettysburg, many Confederate sharpshooters took refuge in buildings around the town. This can be shown through the signs of arms fire and the other pockmarks that line the building's walls. However, the Jacob Stock House is really one of the only houses to experience this level of damage, as indicated by the large holes that had to be patched in its exterior, as well as the sheer amount of dents that remain today in the brick walls. So, when talking about this example of the Stock House, I am referring to the town proper of Gettysburg. Of course, out in the fields, in the more openly contested grounds, the farmsteads received a significant amount of damage from artillery shells and other projectiles during the battle. That wasn't uncommon. So, there must have been a reason that the Union shot tirelessly at these walls and even brought a cannon over to fire at such close range, especially in a populated area of town. It could be that these Confederate sharpshooters were especially efficient at taking out Union men, which would be cause for irritation on the Union side. Or perhaps there was a stash of items hidden up in the attic that the sharpshooters were trying to protect that the Union wanted to get a hold of. We can only speculate, but we know that there must be a reason. Now, the damage, as seen by the Jacob Stock House, could be seen as the normal way of doing things during the American Civil War. The destruction of the town of Fredericksburg in December of 1862 certainly corroborates this notion. These photos show the ruins of the main town of Fredericksburg. Homes were pillaged and ignited. Many citizens had fled prior, but some remained. Confederate artillerist Edward Porter Alexander describes the scene. He says, "Several buildings were set on fire, and their black smoke rose in remarkably slender, straight, and tall columns for 200 feet, perhaps before they began to spread horizontally and unite in a great black canopy." Before they decided to make this move, Union Major General Edwin Sumner had warned the mayor, Thomas Slaughter, that the town was aiding the rebels, both by providing them structural support as well as support through railroad supplies. While the two were figuring out negotiations, this allowed time for civilians to evacuate the area. However, after a few days' hiatus, Confederate sharpshooters began to fire at the Union forces across the river unexpectedly. A frustrated Burnside saw this as a violation of the treaties and negotiations that he was trying to figure out with the mayor during this time. Burnside decided to send his troops in at full force. Union soldier Thomas Aldrich describes the looting, saying, "Frequently a bullet would come whizzing down the street. It was a very unpleasant sight to see the destruction of property. Vandalism reigned supreme. Men who at home were modest and unassuming now seemed to be possessed with an insatiate desire to destroy everything in sight." By saying this, Aldrich is making it known that this wasn't common for these men. There was some anger and desire for vengeance that fueled these actions. It could be because of how the war was going so far, or maybe because the Union forces were just tired of waiting to make their attack on the Confederate forces at Fredericksburg. Overall, this pillaging was intended to push the Confederates out of the town and also make the railroads unusable for them since they had been so crucial in the Confederate war effort. the Union decisively lost this battle at Fredericksburg, they still had clear intentions with their plans. Many men might have felt regrets in retrospect, but they were also able to justify their actions in the greater scope of the Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln even believed that if the same battle were to be fought over again every day through a week of days with the same relative results, the army under Lee would be wiped out to its last man. The Army of the Potomac would still be a mighty host. The war would be over. The war would be won at a smaller cost of life than it will if the week of lost battles must be dragged out through yet another of camps and marches, and of deaths in hospitals rather than upon the field. But yet, there are still so many Civil War battlefields and sites across the country that remain intact, including the many preserved buildings here in Gettysburg that millions of people visit every single year. Gettysburg didn't experience the extent of street fighting that the Battle of Fredericksburg did, because the main masses of the both armies weren't centered in the town areas. And at the level that this damage did occur, it was based on strategy and pushing out the enemy, as seen in the example of the Jacob Stock House and pushing out the Confederate sharpshooters. So, as we're starting to see, the destruction of civilian spaces weren't based on a reckless spontaneity, but rather had some intentionality behind it. Author Aaron Sheehan Dean's book, Calculus of Violence, describes these themes, not only at the Battle of Gettysburg, but throughout the course of the Civil War. Sheehan Dean summarizes that participants fashioned a wartime calculus through which they balanced the moral, strategic, and political dimensions of their actions, but that calculus itself changed as the war evolved. So, there were a lot of things to consider for these soldiers. They couldn't just act on impulses. For example, the Liber Code, which was organized in April of 1863, set out a series of rules that soldiers had to follow when it came to non-combatants, as well as public and private property. While these rules were set in place, generals were still given freedom to do what they thought was necessary in order to advance the war effort. This is seen by Union General William Tecumseh Sherman's scorched earth tactics in his march to the sea in late 1864. He created an intimidating name for himself as he sought to demoralize the South in their efforts. But in most cases, the little towns that these armies fought in and around were left standing because there wasn't a huge political gain to be had by tearing them down. Both sides wanted to prove that they were more sophisticated than their enemy. Even in the midst of brutal warfare, these soldiers wanted to prove that they could act with honor and gentlemanly valor when making decisions. That this war hadn't led them to completely barbaric actions. That they still remained elements of their humanity. Sheehan Dean writes, "At the same time, claiming nationhood for both North and South required citizens to behave as modern civilized people should. Sometimes this meant committing the violence necessary to ensure the success of their way of life, and at other times it meant abstaining from violence to claim the moral high ground in the eyes of the world." While the Civil War caused immense destruction, it was usually calculated and thought out, as this book discusses. To just scatter throughout towns and destroy every building in sight with no good reason wasn't the prerogative of these Civil War troops. There were laws to uphold, as well as basic ethics. Union General Ulysses S. Grant refers to these aspects as what I conceive to be my duty. The ruining of towns could be due to military or political gains, or even as a form of revenge for past retributions in order to make one side look better. While the Civil War was based on military advancements, it was also based on public opinion. The Union and Confederate, both of these sides, had to consider the people they were fighting for and maintain a favorable view in their eyes. So back to the Jacob Stock House behind me. While we might not know the specific intentions or motivations of what occurred here, we do know that there was a reason for the artillery shells and bullet marks found in this building. On the other hand, there are a lot of buildings in Gettysburg, preserved buildings today, that were untouched by the violence that occurred in this town. According to Sheehan Dean's book, there's also a reason for this too. So, this quaint tavern was a unique occurrence of this type of destruction, and it didn't set the standard for the rest of the American Civil War. However, this type of destruction would become commonplace with the arrival of 20th century warfare. Thank you everyone, this has been Camryn Counsil from the Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College.